Dionysius I of Syracuse forced his own teenage daughters to burn his beard off with red-hot walnut shells because he refused to let any living person near his throat with a blade. This is the king who built a palace with over 1,000 rooms and slept in a different one every single night, who dug a moat around his own bed, who invented what historians consider the first surveillance system in the Western world. But the scissors thing? That's not even the strangest part of this story. The strangest part is how he got this way and what his paranoia eventually cost him. Syracuse, Sicily, 405 BC. The most powerful Greek city in the Western Mediterranean is about to fall. Carthage has sent a massive army across the sea, and Syracuse's generals have fumbled the defense so badly that citizens are rioting in the streets. Into that chaos steps a 25-year-old clerk. Not a general, not a nobleman, a former secretary with a sharp tongue and absolutely zero military credentials. His name is Dionysius, and within a matter of weeks he will talk his way into becoming the supreme military commander of Syracuse, and then he will never ever let go of that power. Here's how he did it. Dionysius stood before the citizen assembly and accused the current generals of treason, corruption, and incompetence. He was fined for breaking assembly rules. A wealthy supporter paid the fine on the spot. He kept talking, he kept accusing. And the terrified citizens of Syracuse, watching Carthaginian armies burn their countryside, did something desperate. They handed total military authority to this nobody. Dionysius immediately surrounded himself with a personal bodyguard of mercenaries, moved into the fortified island of Ortygia at the heart of Syracuse's harbor, and sealed the causeway behind him. The democratic assembly that gave him power would never meaningfully meet again. He was not born paranoid. The world made him that way. And in fairness, the world gave him excellent reasons. Within his first year as tyrant, Dionysius survived at least 2 major assassination attempts and a full-scale revolt by his own citizens. During one uprising, rebels actually trapped him inside his fortress. His mercenaries were scattered, his allies had abandoned him. Ancient sources tell us he considered suicide. He reportedly sat in his quarters debating whether to fall on his own sword or try to fight his way out. He chose to fight. And he won. But that moment broke something inside him. From that night forward, Dionysius operated under a single governing principle. Everyone is a potential assassin. Your allies, your advisors, your friends, your family. Everyone. He began constructing what would become one of the most elaborate personal security systems the ancient world had ever seen. First, he expelled the entire civilian population from Ortygia Island. Every man, woman, and child who was not a soldier or a direct servant was removed. He then ringed the island with new walls, new towers, and new gates, all controlled exclusively by foreign mercenaries who had no loyalty to Syracuse, only to his payroll. He built a secondary wall inside the first, then a third perimeter around his personal quarters. And around his bed, he dug a dry moat, a trench cut into the stone floor, crossable only by a narrow wooden bridge that he personally pulled inside his chamber every night before he slept. But even that was not enough. On the limestone cliffs north of Syracuse, Dionysius had thousands of prisoners of war cutting stone in a network of quarry caves. One of these caves had a peculiar shape, tall and narrow, tapering to a point at the top like a giant ear canal. And Dionysius, or more likely his engineers, discovered something remarkable. The acoustics of this cave were so precise that a whisper at the bottom could be heard perfectly at a small opening near the top, 60 feet above. Dionysius turned this quirk of geology into a weapon. Prisoners were held in the cave. Guards listened from the hidden opening above. Every murmured conversation, every whispered plot, every complaint was captured and reported directly to the tyrant. The cave still exists today. You can visit it in Syracuse. It is called the Ear of Dionysius, a name given to it centuries later, and it is considered by many historians to be the first known acoustic surveillance system. But Dionysius didn't just spy on prisoners. He deployed networks of informants throughout the city. Ancient writers describe a class of people in Syracuse called prosagogides, essentially secret police, women and men who mingled in public spaces, in markets, in gymnasia, listening for any critical word spoken against the tyrant. If you were overheard making a joke about Dionysius, you could be arrested that same day. If you were overheard praising democracy, you might simply vanish. The philosopher Philoxenus learned this the hard way. Invited to dinner with the tyrant, Dionysius read aloud some of his own poetry and asked for honest feedback. Philoxenus told him the poetry was terrible. He was sent to the quarries that same night. When Dionysius invited him back weeks later and read another poem, Philoxenus reportedly stood up and said, "Take me back to the quarries." It is one of the few jokes from the ancient world that still genuinely lands. Now about those rooms. Ancient sources, including Cicero and Diodorus Siculus, describe Dionysius's palace complex on Ortygia as a sprawling labyrinth of chambers, corridors, and dead ends. The exact number varies by source, but the tradition holds that the complex contained so many rooms that Dionysius could and did sleep in a different chamber on any given night. No pattern, no schedule. His own guards often did not know where he was sleeping until morning. He never visited a private home. He never attended a public banquet he did not personally control. When he held meetings, attendees were searched, not just patted down, stripped, changed into garments provided by his staff, then searched again before leaving. And then there was the matter of grooming. Dionysius would not allow a barber near him. The risk of a razor at his neck was simply unacceptable, so he taught his own daughters to cut his hair and trim his beard. For a while, this worked. 2 young women he presumably trusted more than anyone in the world. But as they grew older, the paranoia crept even into that relationship. What if someone got to them? What if a rival offered them marriage, power, freedom, in exchange for one slip of the blade? He took the razors away. He took the scissors away. Instead, his daughters learned to singe his beard with heated walnut shells, burning the hair short without ever bringing a sharp edge near his skin. Picture that. The most powerful man in the Western Mediterranean, ruler of Syracuse for nearly 4 decades, sitting still while his own children burn his beard off because he cannot trust a single human being on earth with a blade. There is one more story about Dionysius that you almost certainly know, even if you do not know it comes from him. A courtier named Damocles once flattered the tyrant by saying how wonderful it must be to have such wealth and power. Dionysius offered to let Damocles experience it firsthand. He seated Damocles at a lavish banquet, surrounded him with luxury, then revealed that a razor-sharp sword was hanging directly above his head, suspended by a single horsehair. That, Dionysius told him, is what it feels like to be king. Whether this story is literally true or a later embellishment, it captures something real. Dionysius lived under his own sword of Damocles every single day, for 38 years. He ruled Syracuse from 405 BC until his death in 367 BC. 38 years. One of the longest reigns of any Greek tyrant in history, and he did not die by assassination. He did not fall to a coup. According to most ancient sources, Dionysius died of a fever, possibly brought on by excessive drinking after one of his plays won a prize at a dramatic competition in Athens. The man who spent nearly 4 decades expecting a knife in the dark was ultimately killed by a party. Though, it must be said, some ancient writers whisper that his son may have helped that fever along with a carefully administered drug. Even in death, Dionysius could not escape suspicion. His son Dionysius II inherited the throne and almost immediately proved that paranoia is not genetic. Where his father trusted no one, the younger Dionysius trusted everyone, especially a philosopher named Plato, who twice tried to turn Syracuse into a utopian state and twice failed spectacularly. The son was eventually overthrown. The dynasty collapsed, and Syracuse, the city the elder Dionysius had held in an iron grip for nearly 4 decades, stumbled into decades of instability. But here is what lingers. Dionysius I built walls that survived centuries. His fortress on Ortygia shaped the military architecture of the Mediterranean. The Ear of Dionysius still stands, and the phrase "sword of Damocles" is used in every language on Earth 3,000 years later by people who have no idea it traces back to one deeply frightened man on a small island in Sicily. Now, Dionysius was not the only ancient ruler whose paranoia rewired an entire civilization. There was a Chinese emperor who built an underground palace guarded by rivers of mercury and crossbow traps that may still be armed today. That story is coming soon. If the psychology of power fascinates you the way it fascinates me, stick around. Hit subscribe so you are here when that one drops.